For thousands of years, dedicated priests have kept secret knowledge in Egypt that contains all the basics the modern science is using today, from gene technology to creating nuclear reactors. There is no doubt that the ancient scientists and sages had incredible and mysterious knowledge. Curiously enough, whenever we go back to the time of the Great Flood, we always read about 7 wise men who survived and then laid the foundations of the new age of human civilization. Were they real people? What was their involvement in the construction of the first ancient temples, including the Egyptian pyramids, or were they just a figment of someone's imagination? We'll try to find out together in the new episode of Secret Origins. The evidence from the prehistoric era on the walls of the Temple of Edfu, situated between Luxor and Aswan in Upper Egypt, is really interesting. This temple is believed to have been built in 237–257 BC. Scientists consider the texts on the wall the few surviving fragments that explain the beginning of the cosmos. Professor Raymond from the University of Manchester tells us that these texts contain hidden references and messages. It's about certain mythical events, which is why the laying of the cornerstone, the construction and the functioning of the historic temple are all set in the same mythical era. The temple was believed to be a creation of the gods, which leads us to the conclusion that, according to the ideas of that time, it was an immediate continuation, projection and reflection of the mythical temple that had existed since the beginning of the world. Now, the phrase "from the beginning of the world" could mean the first age, which the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi. In the same era, Thoth recorded the words of the wise men and delivered them in a book that described the location of specific sacred mounts along the Nile. The title of this lost book is Description of Mounts of the Ancient Times. The ancient inscriptions on the walls of temple referred to a group of 7 wise men. They were the only divine beings who knew how to build temples and sacred cities, and they supervised the construction works on the ancient hill, as they call it. Interestingly enough, many experts equate the ancient hill on the rocks with the location of the pyramids of Giza. Another such place is Heliopolis, as there was a sacred peak or a hill from which the first sunrise had been seen. It sounds so beautiful. Thoth himself participated in the activity of wise men, and together they are believed to have built the first mythical temples of ancient times, including the Egyptian pyramids, as Thoth himself recounts in his emerald tablets. Modern archaeologists have little information about the 7 and their identity, having concluded only that they are 7 in number and have an important role in the theory of the origin of the world's first sacred sites. Another interesting thing are the depictions of the flood, described as primordial waves from which the prehistoric hill rises. The first thing that comes to mind is the legend of Noah, but the 7 wise men appear also in other legends, which raises the question: did they really exist, or are they a fragment of someone's imagination? For example, there is scientific literature about the origin of the 7 sages, who after a natural calamity appear as heralds of knowledge. But all over the world there are extremely detailed legends, which is a paradox. The most famous story is that of the flood, according to which one of the gods decided to destroy the civilization because of its corruption. Moses left us one of the stories of what happened in the first book of the Old Testament. As in other legends, each time there is a chosen one, in this case a man, a couple or a few people who need to survive are warned of the impending disaster. If, however, we remove the mythical embellishments, what's left is a historical work that offers an explanation of the development of humanity's past. But the story of Noah, who laid the foundations for a better humanity by defeating the flood, cannot be precisely dated, so it's difficult to assign it to a specific historical time. Also, since 1872, discoveries have been made that suggest that the biblical account of the flood is borrowed from older sources, such as those from the archaic deity Aya, and therefore is essentially of Egyptian origin. It is closely related to Min and Set. In fact, in 1849, the British archaeologist Sir Austin Layard and his assistant Harmust Rassan discovered several brick-covered mounds at Huyunjiu, which prompted them executive further. In September the same year, the two discovered almost 25,000 clay tablets covered with cuneiform inscriptions. The clay tablets contain spiritual and scientific works on philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. They also accounted a number of ancestors of the kings who ruled the country before and those who ruled after a great flood disaster. And these tablets contained Mesopotamia's greatest work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the legend of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian hero, who was 2/3 a god and 1/3 man and claimed he was immortal like the gods. If you haven't watched our episode about the Anunnaki, watch it so that you can make a link to the demigods. German Assyriologist Professor Theodor Quasmann of the University of Cologne was able to find the first line of this work. He found them in the basement of the British Museum in London, and the clay tablet read, "Gilgamesh, who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land, who knew the world's ways, was wise in all things." The Epic of Gilgamesh was engraved in the form of a poem on 12 clay tablets. It only managed to survive because the newly arrived conquerors of Mesopotamia did not consider cuneiform a writing. The quatrains, 200 in number, contain striking similarities to the Bible, only they were written several millennia before it. The archaeologists who made this discovery didn't realize how sensational it was and wrapped it badly before they shipped it to Britain for translation. Therefore, due to the incompetent treatment, many of the tiles were damaged and could no longer be read. It was only thanks to the work of George Smith, a previously unknown young employee of the British Museum in London, that the historical significance of these ancient legends became clear. At that time, however, no one in the so-called scholarly world knew that there was a Babylonian Assyrian literature that deserved to be ranked alongside the great achievements of later writers. Young Smith has just reached the spot when Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu successfully defeated the fiery bull Humbada in the cedar forest of present-day Lebanon. On her triumph return, the goddess Ishtar saw Gilgamesh dressed in his festive robes, wearing the victor's crown, and fell in love with him. He, on the contrary, didn't wish to know anything about his admirer and insulted her, calling her a prostitute, for she already had many love affairs. After this humiliation, Ishtar returned angered to heaven and complained to the great goddess. Then she demanded from her father Anu the death of Gilgamesh. In response, Anu created a bull of heaven on earth, whom 100 warriors could not tame, but Gilgamesh stood the test and was victorious again with the help of his friend Enkidu. Ishtar, who watched the fight from heaven, cursed Gilgamesh and Enkidu. On the night that followed, Enkidu saw in a dream the council of the gods condemning him because he had aided Gilgamesh in the destruction of Humbaba. The sentence was immediately carried out, and Enkidu died that very night from an incurable disease. Gilgamesh mourned for his friend, but at the thought that he too was about to die, he shuddered with fear, and then he remembered a distant relative to whom the gods had granted immortality. Gilgamesh set out in search of Utnapishtim. But just when everything was about to become clear, the story ended. Smith found out that this was just one part of the inscriptions, and the story of the immortal Utnapishtim was present only partially. The clay tablets with the continuation of this epic were hidden somewhere in the chambers of the palace of Nineveh. In fact, Smith was excited to discover almost the moment in the story when Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh about the time before the Great Flood. Of course, what he had read so far of the Epic of Gilgamesh kept bugging him. Smith was discouraged because he wanted to go to Nineveh at all costs to continue his research. But that cost a lot of money, and for a simple employee like him, it was very difficult to secure funding. Besides, who would agree to help find the clay tablets that might contain evidence that the Bible doesn't offer the oldest information, and even more, it's not the only source? However, a London benefactor invested about 1,000 genuis, about 40,000 euros in George Smith's venture and challenge. It was the London's Daily Telegraph, which showed risk-prone interest in the young's research reports, making our access to ancient knowledge possible. On December 3, 1872, George Smith announced his discovery to an astonished audience of the London Society of Biblical Archaeology. Even if the ladies and gentlemen were not particularly delighted with the discovery and even maligned Smith, they couldn't distract the enthusiastic explorer from his enterprise. Consequently, the research team set out for Nineveh in early 1873. Immediately upon arrival, Smith began excavation. His will was extraordinary, and in a huge pile of rubble, George Smith found 384 pieces of clay tablets, including the missing parts of the story of Utnapishtim. And the tiles tell us, long before the flood of the Euphrates River, there was a city of Shurupak when the gods decided to flood the land. The god Ea, who participated in the council of the gods, chose to be a guardian of the man Utnapishtim and decided to warn him of the impending disaster. Man of Shurupak, give up your wealth and build a ship to save your life. Take all kinds of seeds with you on the ship. The measures by which you shall build are well calculated. That confirmed Smith's assumption that the man was experiencing the same thing as Noah from the Bible. The Mesopotamian legends were more detailed and contained considerably more additional information than the Old Testament. Later in that story, Gilgamesh did find his relative Utnapishtim and asked him how he too could achieve the immortality of the gods. Tell me, how did you gain access to the gods' council, and how did you gain eternal life? After Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim talked for a while, the latter told him that the gods had a strange place where a miraculous flower grew that made him immortal like the gods. I'll let Gilgamesh know what's hidden. I will tell you a secret of the gods. There is a plant there. You can prick on it like on a thorn. The two of them set out on their way to the eastern sea to get the flower. According to the legend, the submarine-like vehicle was sailing on the water or under it, and a few days later it finally reached its destination. Perhaps the travelers were using a submarine because in the legend Utnapishtim pointed out the plant's location on the seabed and then showed Gilgamesh a type of plant and explained its property. These plants are magical herbs and bring back youth to people. In 1876, after 3 years of hard work, George Smith returned to England, where he published his innovative for the time theory regarding the Bible. Noah and Utnapishtim are, in reality, the same man who was struck by that same natural disaster. Sadly, George died when he was only 36 and he couldn't witness the triumph of the geological confirmation of his theory by Sir Charles Leonard Woolley. In August 1998, after many years of research, Dr. William Ryan of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, using the 20th century technology, once again confirmed Charles Woolley's results. According to them, after the warming of the northern hemisphere, the water from the melting glaciers had raised to the level of the ocean to such an extent that the former land strip between Europe and Asia Minor had broken off the Bosphorus. According to Dr. Ryan's theory, the Black Sea did not yet exist, but around its deepest point there was a freshwater lake whose shores were inhabited by people. Around 8900 BC, the Mediterranean Sea must have overflowed the former lake, which today can still be found at the bottom of the Black Sea, with a force 200 times greater than that of the Niagara Falls. For 2 years, about 16 cubic kilometers of seawater kept flowing into the Black Sea every day, so that the sea level was rising about 15 centimeters a day. In that flood-like disaster, the lake expanded by 2 kilometers in 1 day. Dr. Ryan concludes, out of this hell could have arisen the biblical flood. Also, on September 28, 1999, the discoverer of Titanic, James Ballard, stated that he only wanted to penetrate to a depth of 140 meters to find on the seabed some well-preserved ships from biblical times. In the summer of 2000, the explorer did indeed succeed in discovering the remains of ancient buildings in the vicinity of the northern Turkish town of Sinop. There once lived people who must have left their dwellings fleeing for their lives. Interestingly, with all these facts, we'd better consider that neither the Old Testament nor the cuneiforms are telling us about a natural disaster, but about a punishment controlled by the gods. Furthermore, the texts are talking about a worldwide flood and not just localized to a particular area. Maybe the real cause of the worldwide catastrophe actually came from heaven. Furthermore, there are more than 300 flood legends in the world, which always refer to the Great Deluge, as well as to chosen one appointed by the gods and to the building of a corresponding ark. The inscriptions on the walls of the temple of Edfu tell us that the 7 wise men came from a small island that was destroyed by the Great Flood. Besides, all the inscriptions at Edfu say that they came from an island, the homeland of the first people, and the island was destroyed by a flood. Most of the inhabitants drowned and the few survivors settled in Egypt, becoming the builder gods who worked in primeval times. What do you think about the biblical story of Noah? Is the Bible really accurate? Or there is a more mysterious story behind all of this that can reveal finally the true history of human civilization? We bow before you and thank you once again for watching another episode of Secret Origins. Next time we will go again to ancient Egypt and inspect the story of the mysterious wise men of Edfu. Until we meet again.